Today, why you don't need a 3D printer. Thanks for joining us today here at the channel. Today we want to spend some time talking about 3D printing. 3D printing is a really fun, creative way to make use of your own designs and get some stuff put into hard parts that you can actually use, especially in RC. I find it really handy for doing body mounts and all kinds of other components on the vehicle that allow you to kind of complete the build. For me, 3D printing is something that I do that's more structural. I definitely prefer it over doing sort of like styrene work when it comes to mounts and structure, but each to his own. Today we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff on the printer itself and talk about some of the hurdles and challenges that I've had to overcome to keep going with 3D printing. And I'd like you to consider some interesting ideas that maybe you haven't that might help you decide that you do not need a 3D printer. Well, I certainly do love it when it's running well. When it's running well, it's running really well. But like any well-oiled machine, it requires a lot of maintenance, and there can definitely be some troubles along the way. One of the things that happens to 3D prints all the time is the simple term that we use called failed print. There could be lots of reasons for that. Sometimes the head gets clogged and you don't get material coming out on time. And therefore, if you skip layers for any reason in the build, then you end up with an air gap, and this layer now trying to come down doesn't have anything to attach to, and you get a big mess of parts. Or you get a super thin part because of compression on the plate. There's tune-up issues with the Z0 that you need to look after anytime that you make contact with the plate. So lots to consider there. And you may end up with just literally drawers full of scrap parts that you can't use, that you think you might use later, and then you save them for no reason, or maybe that's just me. So basically what happens with most of the home printers now is you have hot material that's being extruded onto a flat glass plate, and the parts are supposed to stay flat on the back, and when they stay flat, it's great. But everybody knows that in 3D home printing, the parts don't necessarily stay flat on the plate. And in my case, with the Ender printer, the hot glass bed was accepting prints that were staying flat and attached to the bed very well for a very long time. And then they weren't. You can see the curled edges here. So the flatness you can see in the middle of the part, and then all the edges are curved up, where they'd actually been drying and cooling and lifting off of the glass while the material was still being printed above it. So what you ended up with is part of it that's flat, part of it is now arced or curved, or it didn't finish laying flat on the bed. And this is what happens when it lifts off the table edge. You can see the gap. So it was flat on the table, on that line in between there. That was flat. But that's not flat on the tips, because the tips kind of lifted up. This is where adhesives come in. So after about a couple hundred hours of printing on my new machine, I came to realize that the material was now not attaching to the hot glass bed the way that it had when it was new. So as the bed wore in, if you will, I was starting to have lifting corners and edges, and eventually some failed prints where the print would actually come off the table entirely while it was running, and then as the head would come around, it would just knock that piece right off and then just print in the air, and it's a total mess. And I had a 21-hour print on, and so there was a lot of useless material there. So this is my glue of choice here, and I've used a bunch of different glue sticks. This is the only one that actually seems to work at all. and it works so good. I can't get these parts off the tray now. I got everything off the plate except for this one piece, and I cannot get this piece off. And I don't want to stick a screwdriver in there and damage the plate or crack the glass or something. Like, I've tried everything to get this to come off. I can't get underneath it. Like, I'm telling you, that stuff, that glue stuff, it works so good. The print quality is incredible because everything lays so flat for the whole print. But sometimes, if you have a structural piece like this that's thick, that's flat, there's no way for you to twist it in order to get it off. So, now what? Ugh. Oh my goodness. This is the same glue that I actually was using for the last multiple years on my ABS printer. The ABS has a really high shrinkage rate after the print. And so as the material would cool, I had constant problems with it leaving the glass bed on its own during the print. So this was the way to fix that. Of course, the raw material for 3D printing at home is going to come from a spool, a round spool that looks like a line of plastic of some kind. And then it gets fed into the hot end so it can melt and then produce a shape that you want instead of just being a straight, great big long bar of plastic. But so it's printing away just fine over here, except that we're not done. And as you can see, the spool is pretty much run out. So here's yet another question. If you're doing this yourself and you run out of material in the middle of your roll like that, well, your print's garbage and now you got no roll. Or you don't print it because you don't have enough material on the roll, and now you got a roll with a little bit of material on it that you basically just don't use. In case you were wondering, it did run out of filament, which means I have a part of a fender. And now this whole tray is basically junk. Now, as you can see, I have to take the plate off in order to get my material off of the plate. And in a lot of cases, it's basically impossible to get off, especially if it's a well-made structural component. It's very difficult to get the material to suddenly come apart off the glue that's attaching it to the hot plate. So that's a real struggle sometimes. Now, every time I have the plate off the machine, if you touch it, you better re-level it. Because we're talking about percentages of millimeters for contact patch. Every layer that goes around is 1/10 of a millimeter or 1/20th of a millimeter or a 1/40th of a millimeter. You can do very fine layers on 3D printing in order to get really good quality prints that are strong, that have the detail you're looking for, and there's really good technology in there to make quality parts. But in that, you have to finely tune these things so that they will produce what you're looking for, and they do wear out. For once, it's actually working perfectly. Just like any well-oiled machine, just like any machine at all, requires maintenance. You have to be willing to do really fine details, fine motor tuning, fine bed tuning, making sure the belts are the right tension, making sure your hot end is clean, making sure your material is not full of moisture because it's been sitting out, or you've got the correct settings in your slicer. There are hundreds of variables that need to be constantly attended to in order to make sure that your 3D printer is continuing to work well. But, as they say, when it's good, it's good. When it's straight and it's good, it's straight. Like, look at that. Look how straight those lines are. I mean, that is just insane. So when it's good, it's good. I'd like to make one final point about 3D printing when it comes to your community. In most of our RC communities, we know people who are doing quite a bit of 3D printing. Usually there's somebody in our local community who we know has a printer, does a good job, does a lot of print work, and I would highly recommend that if this is the guy that you know, get a hold of somebody in your community like this person, whoever they are, and maybe they can do your print work for you. Ask them. There's a couple reasons for that. Not only is it going to eliminate all the headaches with material, with bad parts, with bad programming, with having spools run out, with technical difficulties on the machine, with the expense of the machine itself. 3D printing is not free. And one of the things that people just don't consider is they think, oh, this is a nice little plastic part. It's a decoration for my roof rack, or it's a bunch of light pods. I'd be happy to pay $2 for those. There can't be more than $2 worth of plastic in that. Except that the guy who's actually running the 3D printer also has to know how to set it up in order to create that part and create it well and do it well enough that he's willing to give it to you in exchange for some funds for his time and material. And most of the 3D printing guys that I know have them set up in a way that they're dialed in. They could probably drop in just about any file and be able to do a quick tune on the slicing program so that they can produce a good, reliable part. And that's worth some money. If you're not willing to pay more than like $1 or $2 for parts, then maybe you need to try 3D printing on your own so you can see how much work it really is. It's not very simple. It's certainly not free. And I would encourage you, if you can, to support the guys in your local community who are doing it well, who have the expertise, and you can pay them a few dollars to enjoy their expertise instead of having the headache all on your own shoulders. 3D printing is a big job. It's very rewarding, but I would encourage you to use your community printer instead of trying it yourself. Particularly if you are not interested in all the technical setup, if you're not very keen on the computer programming, or if you get easily frustrated with small details. If that's you, don't get a 3D printer. Thanks guys for watching. We hope to read all your comments all the time. And thanks so much for your support, and thanks so much for being a part of this channel, and we will talk to you on the next one. Hey guys, just a quick note at the end of this video to tell you that we have done probably 100 of these side trays, body mounts for GCM chassis. We've got tons of inner fenders. We're producing new files all the time. Roll pans for Blazer as well. All kinds of new mounting brackets and inner fenders that are available for our upcoming chassis release. And all these files are free for your download to our builders group on Patreon. So check us out at patreon.com, gcmracing, and we'll be happy to see you over there and join in the community. We'll have a builders group that discusses stuff about different types of printer issues that we come across, as well as all the GCM file downloads are put on that group, and we hope you can join the community over there. We'll see you later.